Hey, good afternoon. We're going to get started again here in the community lounge. We're going to transition a bit over to the not supported segment of the program. In this segment, we really highlight different things that you can do with VMware products that aren't supported. And so as an early disclaimer, it's not supported. So, do at your own risk. Our first presenter is William Lamb. William, you presented in San Francisco as well for the not supported, and I know everybody was very, very excited about that. And in fact, on your blog, you do a lot of not supported stuff.
Yeah,
in
pretty
general.
much the entire blog is not supported.
And that's what we love about it. So I'm going to quit talking. I'm going to hand it over to you, William. And so for the next 30 minutes, it's going to be William with not supported. Thanks,
All right,
William.
Thanks. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. All right. So today I'm going to talk about vGhetto Lab. Back in San Francisco, I did a presentation on vInception, which is running nested virtualization. One of the challenges that home users have around setting up a lab is different configurations that you have to set up to be able to get a virtual infrastructure up and running. So nested virtualization is just part of setting up this lab. And so here I'm going to talk about setting up a full lab using very minimal hardware that you can do on your laptop or a small server configuration. So first off, I'm going to ask everybody to take a look at the disclaimer. It's really, really important, and I'll give you guys a few minutes to take a look over information. And the very last line is really important. So everything here is completely not supported. All right, so the agenda for today, we're going to talk about some of the challenges in setting up a home lab. And we'll look at how we can leverage the vCenter server appliance as a way to do provisioning, management, and best of all, there's no Windows requirements at all. So some of the challenges for setting up a lab is you need to have some basic infrastructure. If you're setting up one or two hosts in the lab, you can probably do it manually. But if you want to play with some of the advanced features such as auto deploy or have multiple ESXi hosts to test some of the new configurations, you need to do mass provisioning, or if you want to upgrade your configurations. So some of this includes host provisioning as one example. You need some basic services such as DHCP, TFTP, and again, those are things that you have to set up before you can actually set up your home lab. We're also limited by resources. I don't know about you guys, but nobody has infinite resources, especially for a home lab. So we are limited by resources, so the idea is to be able to do more with less. So here the solution is using the vCenter server appliance, and I'll show you how you can leverage this particular appliance to be able to have a complete working lab with, under 20 minutes. So for the overall, we're going to start out with one physical ESXi host. If you have multiple hosts, you can install this, but in this particular configuration, you just need to start with one bare metal ESXi host. We'll then deploy the vCenter server appliance, set up our DHCP service, our TFTP service, and then auto deploy. And then we'll use something called RVC, and we'll go into a little bit more detail in a few minutes. And then we'll go ahead and provision some nested ESXi hosts. And then in under 20 minutes, you'll have a fully working lab in your environment that you can start leveraging some of the key features in VMware's product line. So the requirements are really basic. You just need one physical ESXi host. Here I'm using ESXi 5.1. You need an ESXi offline depot. This works with the 5.0 or 5.1. So in this example, I'm using 5.1. And I'm using the VCSA 5.1 build as well. And this also works with the 5.0 environment. So for the physical install, it's a vanilla installation of ESXi. We'll then go ahead and deploy the vCenter server appliance. We need to configure two network interfaces, so by default the appliance just has one interface. For the public interface, that's how you connect to the system, and for the ETH1 interface, we're going to be using that for our auto deploy network. So here we have just a standard virtual switch connected to the VCSA, one that has binding to our network card, and the other one has no network bindings to it. Then for our VCSA configuration, we need to configure the two interfaces. We need to set up basic DNS hostname lookups on the appliance. And then the second portion of it is configuring the actual vCenter service SSO and the actual vCenter service. So here I have two really simple shell scripts that will go ahead and automatically configure this configuration for you. The first one is called setup.network. This will actually configure the network interfaces, set up your host names. And then the second script is the configure VCSA 5.1. This will automatically configure your vCenter server appliance to automatically set up vCenter server for you without having to go through the web interface. Let me know if you guys can see the video. Can you guys, you guys can see it? Okay. So here, what we're going to start off with is basically copying all of the files to our vCenter server appliance. So I have my offline bundle, I have my 3 shell scripts, and we'll take a look at how each of these scripts work. So here I'm SSHing to our vCenter server appliance. You can see that it has localhost, so nothing's been configured on it. You can see that we have the offline depot bundle, we have the configure VCSA script, our setup script, and then our lab script. So we'll go ahead and kick off, we'll go ahead and set the execute bit on the scripts to ensure that we can actually run them. And we start off by running the setup.network script. And here we're just filling out a few parameters, the IP address of your vCenter server appliance, if you have DNS, any kind of domain configurations, and then we're also configuring both the public interface and the interface that we're going to be using for auto deploy. And lastly, we bounce the interface. So here I'm SSHing to the new IP address, which is .150. And I do a host name to ensure that all the configurations have been changed. So the next step is we're going to configure the actual vCenter service itself. So here we're configuring the embedded database on the vCenter appliance. We're configuring SSO, and then we're going to start the vCenter service. And now I'm connecting to my vCenter server appliance, and to confirm that there's no inventory in this particular configuration. So here I'm clicking through the vCenter server, showing that this is the vCenter server that we just deployed, configured in under 5 minutes. We can see that there's no inventory. All right, so the next section of this, we're going to use the vCenter appliance going forward for the remainder of the configurations. Next, we need to configure DHCP and TFTP. So I don't know if you guys know, but actually all these services are part of the vCenter appliance. Again, these are not supported, but out of the box, these are available there, so definitely take advantage of it. So here we need to configure DHCP, so we need to edit the etc DHCP configuration. For the secondary interface, I'm using a 172.30/24 network. I want my DHCP range to be .100.200. And then I configure the etc sysconfig DHCPD configuration. This tells which particular interface I want to do DHCP on. And then lastly, I want to enable these services. So we have our DHCP server, our TFTP server, and we have the VMware RBD.watchdog, which is the auto deploy service. So we go ahead and start the services, and we also ensure that they will start up automatically upon reboot. All right, next up is the auto deploy configuration itself. So to configure auto deploy with the vCenter server appliance, you only have to do one thing, just register the service with the VCSA. As you guys know, with auto deploy, you don't need Windows to actually run the service. There is an auto deploy configuration within the vCenter server appliance. So at this point, how many of you guys are using auto deploy today? Okay. What's the requirement that's required to configure auto deploy once you have it all set up? What do you need? What are the tools? There we go. So Power CLI. But earlier I said there's no Windows, right? So this is really not supported. So within the VCSA, I don't know if you guys know, there are some utilities that you can leverage. So for those of you who've worked with auto deploy before, right? What are some of the things that we have to do? We have to create an image profile. We have to create some rules. And then we're going to enable the rules themselves, right? So within the VCSA, and this is in both the 5.0 and the 5.1 release, there's a nice little command called Pixie Profile command. This can be used to create your image profile. To create the auto deploy rule, there's a nice little command called rule-command. And we'll be using this to create our auto deploy rule to bind to a specific rule set, whether it's a vendor, MAC address, or IP range. And then lastly, we need to take those rules and we need to enable the rules themselves. So there's a utility called rule set command. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on how these commands actually work. The next part, before we start the actual configuration, is we need to take our offline depot and we need to extract the VIBs out of this zip file. And the VCSA is also a web server. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a temporary directory under the doc root folder. So when you go to your VCSA appliance, you have the web page where you can download your C# client. You have the web page to point to the vSphere web client. We'll go and leverage the web server, and we're going to create a directory called ESXi 5.1. And we're going to store these extracted VIBs in this particular directory. And these will be leveraged when we actually create our image profile. So for this particular configuration, we're going to be using a simple script. Again, setup.vghetto.lab. In 5 minutes, this full configuration will be automatically set up for you. So you just have to fill out a few variables and execute the script. So I'll walk you through on how this script works since it executes very quickly. So we scroll back up, so this is the actual output, and it's quite verbose. You can definitely comment things out so that it's not as verbose, but I want to show you what it looks like. So at the very beginning, as part of the script, we kind of talked about we configure DHCP, we configure the particular interface that's going to be hosting DHCP services. We create the repository directory under the web server. Here we're extracting the contents of the offline depot. So that's what you're seeing right there on the screen. Next, we're going to register our auto deploy service within the VCSA. Then I'm going to be starting our various services within the vSphere server appliance. So we have our TFTP server, our DHCP server, and then our auto deploy service. And then I'm configuring these services to automatically start up upon reboot. Here I'm opening up a separate SSH terminal. The previous screen is basically just the raw verbose output, so I'm just echoing it to the actual screen itself. So I'll walk you through on each of those commands. So to be able to use these CLI utilities, we need to set two environmental variables, VI username and VI password. So this is the login to the actual vSphere server appliance. So the first utility we're going to look at is the pixie command. So if you do a -- help, you can get the list of options that's available for this utility. So the script will automatically generate this output for you, and again, you can uncomment this and it'll automatically execute it. Here, I just want to show you what it looks like and kind of go through the actual command line by line. Looks like I have to wait for it. Looks like I have to wait for it to buffer a little bit. Let's see. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, so here we're copying the text. Then we're going to go in and execute that in the secondary window. And again, this is all automatically generated from the script, so you don't have to worry about actually typing all this out. So here we're running the pixie profile dash command. We're using the create parameter, and then we're specifying every single VIB that's included. So we have to specify the -p option, and I just iterate through all the VIBs as part of the actual zip file. So here we're actually downloading from within the VCSA. So we created that directory earlier to contain all of our zip files. This particular command is normally pointed to a repository. So here we're basically doing kind of a loop mount back to itself. So it's downloading the actual zip files and inserting this into the auto deploy service. All right, so at the very end, you can see that we have a image profile that's been created. So for the next command, we're going to create our auto deploy rule. So we'll be using the rule dash command, and again, you can specify a dash dash help option, and I'll give you the list of available options for the command. So here I'm creating my rule profile. In the previous command, I don't know if you missed it, but I called the image profile ESXi 5.1, right? So that's the name of our image profile. Here I'm giving it the name as first boot, and I'm tying it to a particular vendor. You can tie that to a MAC address, IP address, just like how auto deploy normally works. After creating our auto deploy rule, the last thing that we need to do is basically enable the rule. So we use the rule set dash command. Again, you can use the dash dash help command to get options for this particular CLI. And then we run the set operation. So now we have an auto deploy rule configured to automatically boot ESXi hosts that have vendor dash VMware. So next step, we need to provision our nested ESXi host to be able to leverage the auto deploy service that we had just configured, right? So you have two options. The first one is deploy nested ESXi using the traditional method, go into the vSphere web C# client, because we're starting with a single host, right? No vCenter services just yet, nothing to manage the host. The other option, we can use the VCSA without having to leverage any kind of GUI applications. So there's a little utility called the Ruby vSphere console. This is actually a fling created by a few VMware engineers. It's called RVC. I don't know if any of you guys have used it before or heard about it. One really interesting little tidbit that I found is that in the VCSA 5.1, RVC is actually bundled in. I don't know if it's an Easter egg from the developers, but I stumbled upon it actually. So we can actually use this utility. Again, no Windows client, no GUIs of any nature. All from the CLI. We can create a data center object in the VCSA that we just created. We can deploy 3 nested ESXi VMs. We'll go ahead and extract the MAC addresses, update our DHCP server, and then we'll power on our VMs, and it'll automatically provision itself using the auto deploy server that we just configured. So in this video, I'm using RVC. We're actually connecting to the VCSA that we just deployed. So I'm logging in right now. And the first operation I'll do is just create a data center. So it's a really simple one-liner. And if we do an ls, we can see that the data center has been created. So now if I go back to the vCenter server appliance, which had no inventory at all, I do a refresh, I can see that I have a data center object there now. And again, to prove to you that there's nothing pre-provisioned there, all the inventory is completely zero. So now I log out of the VCSA that we deployed, and I'm going to use RVC to log into our physical ESXi host to provision the nested ESXi VMs. So again here, to prove to you that there's no magic behind the scenes, there's only one VM that's running on this physical ESXi host. There's a command called vm.create, so we'll use this command to create our 3 nested ESXi VMs. And at the very bottom, there's some example help files. So here I'm creating the first VM called ESXi-01. You'll need to specify a local resource pool, and then a data store object on where it's going to live. Oh, there we go. And then specify the memory and the guest OS type. So here we're creating a ESXi 5.x VM, so it's going to be VM kernel 5.guest. And it's also really easy to use RVC. So here I'm quickly modifying the CPU. I forgot to set two CPUs for this VM, so here I'm just running the vm.modified command. We also need to configure the address or the actual network that this VM is going to connect to. So if you remember earlier, we created 2 networks, one for the vCenter server appliance, and we created an auto deploy network, which is not bounded by any physical NIC. So this is going to be the port group that we're going to connect this VM to. So here I have my first VM. So I go and repeat that process again and for the other 2 VMs. So here you can see that the VM is created, and we can see that the Ethernet connection is disconnected. There's no MAC address associated at this point. Okay. So I powered on the 3 VMs. And here we can see that we have the MAC addresses of each of the nested ESXi VMs. So we'll be using these to insert those addresses into our DHCP server, so that way when it boots up, it'll know that it's going to map to a particular IP address that we want to specify for this VM. So we go ahead and quit out of RVC, and we're going to open up the etc DHCPD configuration, and we're going to copy these 3 MAC addresses into the configuration, and then we'll go ahead and save the file, and we'll restart our DHCP service. So now we're going to log back into our physical ESXi host, and we're just going to do a quick reset of the VM, so that way they automatically will do a Pixie boot and automatically pick up auto deploy. So once we reset those VMs, we can see that it's automatically picking up the auto deploy image profile that we just created. So after a minute, we'll see that they've all provisioned based on the IP address that I specified earlier. Now if I go back to my appliance that we had deployed earlier, and we refresh the inventory, we now see that we have 3 ESXi hosts that we just deployed. So all of this is all done in under 20 minutes. I have 3 scripts that you execute, and you'll have a complete working lab that you can kind of start playing with the environment. You can do some really interesting things with it. You can use the vCenter appliance, so use that as external NFS storage, right? You can deploy an NFS appliance, so really get you going really quickly without having to spend all this time setting up your basic infrastructure. And the requirements to get all this running is really just 1 ESXi host, our VCSA 5.0 or 5.1, and the offline depot, and all this is completely free. So I wanted to link some additional resources. All these things will be posted after the session. Here are some additional blog posts if you're interested, and definitely visit virtuallyghetto.com for additional information on other configurations. And that's the end of the question. Is there any questions?
Does this thing still work? All right, good deal. So 20 minutes.
Yep.
That's all it takes.
Yeah, under 20 minutes.
And that's not too shabby.
Yeah.
And
the idea is trying to get everybody to get going and all that. You know, a lot of people spend a lot of time just trying to, set up your infrastructure just to be able to get to your lab and all that. And I want to help people jump into what they want to start doing and all that, especially for training, learning, testing out new features and all that.
Yeah, which, as the brown bag audience knows, training and getting your hands on stuff. I mean, that's one of the challenges I have now is just getting my hands on the latest stuff. And it sounds like with just a little bit of kit, you can go pretty far with that.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, William, we really appreciate it. It was great having you again. And hopefully, if we get to do this again, we can pull you in, or maybe even on the podcast.
Definitely.
All right, everybody. We'll quick break while we transition to our next presenter, and we'll get started again here shortly.